Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-hosts. That is RJ Schafer. I'm Jackson Caudell coming to you on Wednesday night. Going to kind of get our last thoughts from the Colorado game last week, 5 days removed. Obviously, RJ wasn't able to make the instant reaction, so we'll kind of hear his thoughts on the game, kind of talk about it a little bit in depth more. I think I've watched it like 3 times since, just trying to get my total thoughts together. So we'll definitely talk about that. Preview the Gardner-Webb game on Saturday. Gardner-Webb had a crazy victory over Western Carolina this past weekend, bring a high-octane offense in. So it'll kind of be interesting to see how Georgia Tech plays against them on Saturday and just kind of give our overall thoughts on the ball game. But before we get into it, RJ, how you doing, man?
Feeling absolutely good. You know how much better it feels to come on this podcast after a win than it does after a loss, especially against a big team like Colorado. So, I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get started here, we hit 900 subscribers. That's awesome, guys. Love it. Love y'all for it. Thank you so much for it. We're now the next goal is 1,000. Like that's the big goal. At some point this season, we'd love to hit it. Keep growing this family. Really appreciate all the support you guys have shown us. So if you're watching this and haven't subscribed, highly encourage you to do so. We like to consider ourselves one of the top Georgia Tech podcasts, but we leave that for you guys to decide. Just love talking about the Yellow Jackets. Love if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow us wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review over there. Love hearing from you guys and all the feedback from the show. So I guess let's get right into it. I said on the instant reaction pod. Now I've had some time to think about it. Georgia Tech, I think, was clearly the better team in that game, despite the horrible start. Like they had a higher success rate. There was a lot of they won in a lot of statistical categories. Kind of what were your overall thoughts on the game? How they bounced back from the poor start? Kind of some areas to improve, and just take it wherever you want to go.
Yeah, the game is honestly, and I told you about this pre-recording, it felt like two totally separate games. The first quarter felt like an entirely different Georgia Tech team, and I think you can salt that up at least a little bit to just being rusty. It's the first game of the year.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I'll just say like the crowd at that game, like I'll give a shout out to Colorado fans, like and Georgia Tech fans too. Like there was a large
mhm.
contingent of Georgia Tech fans there, but those Colorado fans showed up and they made it a really cool and tough atmosphere. So I do think that with some new starters in there, I do think that they made it tough on Georgia Tech early on in the game.
Yeah, honest, all credit to the Colorado student section because they were loud all night. I mean, even back late into the fourth quarter. So shout out to Colorado. But to me, it felt like two different games, and it felt like after the first quarter, it was apparent that you were just not going to pass the ball. Not for lack of talent, but the passing game was just not what we expected heading into the game after the first quarter. Um, Obviously, that interception to end the quarter, and then you just saw them run the ball, and they absolutely ran the ball down Colorado's throat. And I honestly, this is not a Colorado podcast, but I'm quite worried for that Colorado run defense because Malachi Hosley got in that game a little early. Jamal Haynes King, um, obviously battling like he always is, against whatever. I would throw Haynes King in, against a fire, and I think he'd come out on top. But that run game throughout the rest of the game, it just seemed to me that Colorado had absolutely no answer. And I feel like that's going to play very well heading into the latter half of the season. But the problem to me lies in the passing game. You cannot look the way that you did. And I think you can put the blame in a lot of different places. There were a couple bad passes from Haynes King. There were a couple spots, where you had a drop or the pass protection wasn't the greatest. Uh, but I think all in all, as a unit, you have to be better uh, passing the football because you are going to see yourself in deficits. Especially if you play as sloppily as you did in the first quarter, and you're going to need to pass the ball. And I think they did to a certain extent, but that is not the same Georgia Tech passing offense that we've seen in the past, and that's definitely not what you need heading into the season.
No, and I'll say like clearly the emphasis was like they wanted to attack Colorado's run game.
Yeah.
Like that much. Like I wanted to, I made the same point in the instant reaction. Like, yeah, I do. You're going to need to see more from the passing attack. But I do think that there was the mindset of they could run the ball in Colorado, and clearly that was right. Like, I'll kind of talk about the offensive line in a minute. There was like some real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde there. Like, it was the run game was awesome. The way they blocked was awesome. Some of the pass protection and just some of the penalties and the infractions, again, are stuff that you have to really clean up. And I guess let's just take it there, because I think, look, I mean, you can see on the screen here, if you go, like, shout out to Game on Paper. They do a great job. I keep up with this when I'm watching the game. You're just seeing it, different advanced statistical categories. It really like gets into the details and kind of really show you who's the better team. And there's a whole lot of green on the left side of the screen, and there's not so much green on the right side of that graph right there. Kind of what did you think of the offensive line's performance? Because on one hand, Georgia Tech ran for over 300 yards and ran at will. Like, they ran pretty much the whole game when they wanted to. On the other hand, you had a bad snap that resulted in a fumble on that second turnover. So I think it was when it was 20-20 before the Haynes King touchdown drive, and they had to punt the ball back to Colorado. You had Jamal Haynes catch a 27-yard pass out of the backfield. He leaks out of the backfield, catches it, turns upfield, gets a big first down, gets across midfield. You're set up in great position. You can start milking the clock. You can really start winding things down, go on one of those, death march drives that Brent Key loves to go on. But then it was a false start. I think you had a snap infraction, if I'm not mistaken. A couple of penalties that backed you up into that 3rd and 16, and then that's when King missed that throw to Scyther. So it was definitely some good and bad. And if you go look at the PFF grades, like, it really bears that out. Malachi Carney and Keelan Rutledge were some of the highest graded players. But then, Tana and Harrison Moore, at least per PFF, really struggled. And I can say, just from, my own eyes and watching them there, I'm not an offensive line guru, so I'm not going to like heavily criticize it, but I do think that their play can really get a lot better. And for Tana, that was his first real major action like that. Harrison Moore's played a little bit before, but that was Tana's first real action. But I guess kind of what did you think overall? Because we both really praised Colorado's front seven, and they were disruptive. It's about to get really real in next weekend when you're facing. I think Miami's is probably better, but like Clemson could have the best defensive line in the ACC.
Yeah, and that matchup does scare me a lot, and I'll get to that in a second. But one thing that I did see a little bit of, and these weren't exactly the same games, but I do see a parallel from the Florida State game at the beginning of last year to this Colorado game. Now, I will say those are two totally separate games. There were a lot more possessions in this game, but I think with the way that you saw the offensive line play in 2024 at the beginning of the year with Florida State, you saw them progress and work into themselves later, because there were, I don't want to say the same amount, but a similar amount of mistakes by the offensive line to start the season against Florida State, and they ran the ball pretty well. And we saw the offensive line work together and gel together throughout the year. And by the end of the season, I mean, you had one of the best offensive line groups in the country. So that's why, for me, I'm not necessarily worried. And I think it is just first game jitters. I mean, obviously, Tana's really only seen significant action against VMI. No offense to VMI, they're not really on the same level as this Colorado team. And, I think you're going to see him kind of get out of his shell and be able to work into that unit. He was pretty good in run blocking the entire night. Honestly, everybody was. I have no worries about the run game. I'm gonna keep a low level of concern on the pass game, but it's a Brent Key offense. I have no reason to believe that there's anything to worry about on the offensive line in terms of pass blocking.
Yeah, and like, I'm not trying to ring some like 5-alarm fire.
Yeah.
You had some misses, and if you turn the ball over like that and you get down to a better team, like, you're probably gonna have to throw the ball a little bit. And I think just in general, like, as much as we love the Georgia Tech run game and everything, like, you're gonna have to be complimentary and explosive through the air if you want to be a better team than you've been in the past couple of years. Like, it's been great that they've been able to 6-6 and then 7-5, but like, if you actually want to take that step up and be an ACC championship contender and maybe more, like, you have to be consistently explosive in the passing game. And like, they know it. Like, I've heard Buster Faulkner, I've heard Chris Winkie, I've heard Haynes King, Philo. I thought all those guys have talked about being more explosive in the passing game. And like, it's one game. Like, it'll be interesting, as we evaluate this from week to week, kind of And you have to point out that Malik, went out on the first play of the game. He took that snap, got hurt. We don't know his official status for Saturday. I guess just like a quick injury report hit. Like Rodney Shelley, I think is going to be out again from what Brent Key said yesterday. AJ Hoffler returned to practice. Doesn't mean he's necessarily going to play. We'll kind of find that out closer because, as y'all know, like in these non-conference games, they don't have to give an injury report. That the first ever injury report is going to come, like official injury report, like conference mandated injury report is going to come next week because it's conference games only, of course. But obviously, those guys are going to be needed against Clemson. But we don't know Malik's status just yet. I don't know if he's going to play. Hopefully, he's back at least in time for Clemson. But I still think, like I said, it has to be better. And just recognizing that they had an emphasis on running the ball. So let's flip it to the other side because I thought the most impressive, like the run game, yeah. Georgia Tech ran for 300 yards. Who cares? I thought the defense just really, I say that jokingly. I thought the defense was awesome for the most part. Was it perfect? No. But, like, if the defense doesn't play the way it did, like, you get buried at the beginning of that game.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, they honestly kept Georgia Tech in this game because if you play that sloppily against some other teams and you don't back it up on defense, Georgia Tech could have seen themselves in an extremely big hole to start that game. I think you saw that defensive line honestly mesh a lot. I saw a lot of pressure on Kaidon Salter the entire game. I mean, he was running like a bat out of hell from the first quarter. And again, like the offensive unit, I really think you saw the defensive unit get into their own in the second half. And that's honestly the area where I can see Georgia Tech, being the scariest. Obviously, with Gideon at DC, like you're going to see this defense keep progressing under themselves under a first-year coordinator. And I think I see all of these signs of what a good defense can be. And this is a little off topic, but I don't see how you can't rank this Georgia Tech team in the top 25 after this game, seeing how they played on offense, seeing how they played on defense. But, that's another story for another time, I guess.
Yeah, I don't care too much about that. Like, we're about to find out next week how good Georgia Tech is, like as far as being ranked and all that stuff. So it's, that's a discussion for another time. We'll kind of see what happens after this. They did get up to 28th. But yeah, I thought the defense was awesome. I thought Jordan Vandenberg played really well. With Hoffler out, and Hoffler was expected to start. Rodney Shelley's expected to start. So you were missing two key guys as well. Like I thought, Andre Fuller, true freshman, we've had our good friend Najee Wilkins. He's been on here. He has not stopped singing the praise of him, and he was right about that. I thought Akilo Stone, he made some good red zone stops. After the Amari Harvey personal foul, like Colorado got into the red zone there, Akilo Stone stepped up and made a couple of big plays. Obviously, Vandenberg had a sack. I thought Braden Manley did a solid job of getting to the quarterback. Kamen Spalding, I thought was pretty good. He nearly had an interception. He made a couple of key third down stops. He on the fourth down in which Deion Sanders inexplicably did not go for it. Spalding, knocked the running back out of bounds before when it looked like he was about to get the first down, and then it was 4th and short. They're up 7-0, and they decided not to punt, which again is just I still have not gotten over some of the game management calls from the other sideline, but. I thought the linebacker unit was active, and I thought the coverage was good all night long. Look, Colorado's receivers are talented and they have size, and I thought that there was a chance that they were going to throw some, at least just try to hit Georgia Tech deep. They didn't do it as much as I thought. You did have, Amari and Miller catch that 39-yard, had that 39-yard reception. Was it late first? Or no, it was early second half. It was somewhere in between. 5 days feels like a million years ago at this point. But that was really the only explosive passing game that they had. I thought, as you can see right here, like they had a pretty good EPA per rush. Colorado did. It kind of baffled me. And I said this on the Instant Reaction show. I was surprised they didn't give Michael Welch more carries. Like I thought that he was at times their best offensive player. Maybe I think may have been their best offensive player in that game. It just baffled me that they did not give him more carries. But that's neither here nor there. But any other thought? And I guess we should at least hit. There wasn't a lot of special teams plays in here, but Aiden Bird 2 for 2 I think is worth mentioning because he did have his struggles last year.
Hmm. Yeah, and honestly, you saw a lot of guys step into the mix on defense, and I think that was to be expected. Um, but Andre Fuller looked really good. Gilmore looked really good, and I will say there were a lot of guys who had made mistakes earlier in the game, or had some type of bad play, and then stepped up later in the game. Like, Braden Manley had a mistake later in the game, had a pass deflection. Clayton Powell, had a couple of mismatch plays here or there, but I honestly thought he looked really good. And for what this defense is, losing a lot of your uh, guys from last year, I think for a week one performance, they looked very good.
Yeah, I thought so too. So, any other thoughts on Colorado before we put this game out of our minds for a while at least?
I think that's all I got.
All right. So I guess let's turn the page. We're on to week two. Gardner-Webb is on deck. First home game. Hope to see a lot of you guys out there. I will be, of course, covering the game for Georgia Tech on SI at 3:30. Um, so Gardner-Webb actually had a very interesting week one. Western Carolina, who I believe was a top 20 team in the FCS, if I'm not mistaken. You're more of the residential FCS expert here, so you feel free to chime in. They got down big early on, but they came back to beat Western Carolina in Western Carolina, 52-45, and they have a pretty good quarterback. Nate Hampton is a really, really solid dual threat guy. He was now the completion percentage and passing numbers are going to blow you away. I mean, he was 12 of 30, 263 yards, a couple touchdowns. He ran the ball 28 times for over 100 yards and 4 touchdowns. This I at least like the so like I say this like I at least glad that you're playing a team with it looks like a slight pulse and it's going to make you work. Look, I obviously expect Georgia Tech to win the game, but like the last thing you want is to look ahead, and they don't need to be doing this. They should win this game. They should go out there and handle their business. But I do like I'm interested to see how they play against this offense because they do have some explosive playmakers. And look, I don't know that their defense is any good. I mean, Western Carolina had 454 yards. But again, Gardner-Webb put up 627 yards. Again, I know it's Western Carolina. I expect Georgia Tech to handle their business, but you're facing some interesting athletes out there this Saturday. Like I'll give Gardner-Webb their due.
Yeah, and I mean, 24 unanswered points against anybody to win the game is relevant no matter what level it's on. Um, Even if it is FCS, even if it is a lower level. But Nate Hampton, for being a Liberty transfer quarterback, he might have been the quarterback that looked the best transferring out of Liberty in week one.
Other Liberty
That sounds like a crazy thing to say, but
I mean,
you know,
different competition, but yeah,
just looking at the stat sheet, I mean, you can see a difference. I bet he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder heading into this game as well. But honestly, for what I thought Gardner Webb was, this game, I don't want to say it's going to be very competitive, but I'm going to say it's going to be a lot better game than you think. This is a very talented FCS level team. Shoot, they almost hit the over by themselves on that game against Western Carolina. Um, they definitely have athletes all over the field. They can run the ball very well. Had over 600 yards in that game. They probably don't have a FBS high power four level offense, but they definitely have an offense that can do something. So it's not like you're facing an FCS team that's the bottom of the FCS because Gardner Webb is definitely the opposite of that.
yeah. And look, I'm not going to drudge up any bad memories for any Georgia Tech fans. That's the last thing I want to do. But I will take you back nearly 20 years ago to 2008. There was a game played in Atlanta, Georgia, that ended 10-7, and Georgia Tech nearly got by Gardner Webb, and that Georgia Tech team was pretty good. So just again, my point just being handle your business. Gardner Webb was 4-8 last year. They appear to be much better. Again, you were down 35-7 at one point and came back and beat what is supposed to be a top 20 team in the FCS. Who knows? Maybe Western Carolina just isn't any good, and they allowed this to happen. But again, playing a kid like Hampton, giving more experience against dual threat quarterbacks, you're going to be seeing a lot more of those. Wake Forest has a dual threat quarterback here in a couple weeks. Like, obviously, you're going to face Kyron Jones, and they obviously have more talent than Hampton. But I do at least think it gives you a little bit of, all right, you get more practice against a dual threat guy, and you get more stuff to maybe throw at him. Generally, I want to keep things pretty vanilla, especially on offense. And I guess I'll start on offense for Georgia Tech. Now that we kind of talked about Gardner-Webb a little bit. I would not run Haynes King at all in this game. Like, he did enough last week. I do not would not run him any more than you need to. I would let Jamal Haynes handle it. I'd let Malachi Hosley get him some carries. This would be a game I really try to get things going through the air. I'm obviously going to be watching the offensive line, particularly the left side, and just kind of seeing how they handle things and how much they improve. Play a cleaner game. Don't be as sloppy. Get your snaps down, because they fumbled that one high snap in at the beginning of the game, but there were also several other snaps that I don't think were very clean and that they really need to improve on. Ball security. Georgia Tech was one of the best teams at not turning the ball over last year. Like, that's just something that they didn't do. It was a great improvement from 2023. Like, you want the Colorado game to be an anomaly. Like, you don't want this to become a trend, and you just need to take better care of the football, because the last thing you want to do in a game in which you are heavily favored in is give life. Like, you don't want you want to go out there, you want to score early, you want to stop them early, and you want to squash any hopes that other team may have, even if they are a very long shot to win this game. Like, you don't want to go out there and mess around and give them any hope and give them momentum. Like, that's just not something that you want to do. So, like, play clean football early. And then for the defense, I'm anxious to see how they play against this offense. Like, they're clearly more talented, and I expect them to do well. But hey, they had a really good week last week, and they're going to come in with when you have a performance like that, no matter who you're playing, like, you're going to come in with a lot of belief that you can do something like that. It doesn't matter who you play. So I'll just be anxious to see that. I do want to see if the defense can create some turnovers, because they weren't really good at it last year, and they didn't create any last week. I mean, they were -3 in the turnover margin, and all those were in the first quarter. If they could also, they got some decent pressure on Salter last week. You had the one sack by Vandenberg, but I want to see them bring a little bit more pressure, get to the quarterback, and I think you'll see that. Secondary is obviously going to play a huge role in this. You're not going to have Rodney Shelley for another week, so I'll be interested to see how they kind of handle all that. Daquan White, I thought, had a really good game in his limited snaps. Like, he was the highest graded defensive player on PFF. Main thing is just come out and handle business. You're the better team. You're the better team by a lot, and like a whole lot. Just, squash any opportunities that they have early, handle your business, stay healthy, and then, get ready for arguably your biggest game of the year next week.
Yeah, one of the big things that I'm looking for in this game is, especially on the defense, they got a lot of pressure on Colorado in the past game last week. You end the game with only one sack. I want to see them finish the pass rush. I want to see them get to the quarterback, complete a sack, and I want to see that multiple times. And I think you're going to have the opportunity to do that. On offense, again, we have similar keys to this game. I want to see them air it out. I want to see guys get involved. I want to see balls deep downfield. Whether it be Haynes King, or if you get comfortable in the game second half and throw in Aaron Philo, I want to see him unload the ball deep. Either whatever the case is, I want to see the offense gel a little bit better. I want to see less of those first game jitters. I want to see less missed snaps, less miscues, flags, everything of that nature. This should be a game you go in, you play clean, you handle your business, you don't get injured, and you come into the next week. That's all this should be. There should be. I don't want them to underlook Gardner-Webb, because we can see things happen sometimes. FCS teams are sometimes better than you think. And if you come in with an overconfidence, you can struggle. I don't think that's going to happen with this Georgia Tech team. Brent Key's got, everybody on this team, their heads are on straight. You just got to go in and handle business, and I think that's all it is.
Yep. And as Brent Key pointed out, like, Gardner-Webb's head coach, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Chris Reiser, he's a winner. Like, it's his second season at Gardner-Webb. I know they weren't very good last year, but he was a really good coach at Tiffin. I mean, let me see his record. It was he had a 32-4 conference record, overall record of 40-11. Like, I mean, he's a winner, and like, that shows you he knows what he's doing. And I think he's a good coach. So look, I think this is kind of an interesting test. Obviously, I think Georgia Tech's going to win by a lot. Like, I don't know a final score for these kind of games because there's like if Georgia Tech gets up early and just really lays it to them, like could they pull off the gas pedal a little bit? And I don't know. I'm not going to give a final score prediction, but I think Georgia Tech wins. I think they win by 5 or 6 touchdowns probably, and then just get ready for Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, I share similar sentiment. I think it's kind of similar to the VMI game as last year. I think this team is a little bit better than VMI. I'm gonna say you look, yeah. I'm gonna say you look to win or look to be up by 20, 30 at half. Smooth sailing from there. I don't think you need to put the foot on the gas pedal. I don't think you need to do all these outrageous things. But the one thing, I guess one more thing I do want to see is I want to see clean snaps from Tana. That's what I want to see this game. I don't care if he plays all 4 quarters. That's something you got to see.
Yep. So we will be back with an instant reaction on Saturday at some point. The game's at 3:30. I believe it's on ACC Network Extra or ESPN Plus. I don't even know if I have those channels. So like at least I'll be there in the game in person. So any other thoughts before we get out of here?
I think that's all I got.
All right. Well, like we said, we will be back Saturday with an instant reaction where hopefully we will be talking about a Georgia Tech 2-0 start and getting ready for the Clemson game next weekend. If you guys are going out to the game, be safe. I hope to see a lot of you out there. And before we get out of here, if you haven't subscribed already to the YouTube channel, would love it if you have, or would love it if you do. Like the video, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a review over there. It means a lot to us. Nearing 1,000 subscribers. That's the big number we want to hit here soon. Appreciate all the support, and we will talk to you guys on Saturday.